Greetings, programs. Welcome to part 12 of my Project 2025 reading, Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise. We're on page 172 of this 920-page PDF. This section is titled U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Needed reforms. Since the formation of DHS, ICE has increasingly been tasked with auxiliary missions that have little or nothing to do with either immigration or customs enforcement. To return ICE to its primary mission, any new administration that wishes to restore the rule of law to our immigration enforcement efforts should order ICE to stop closing out pending immigration cases and apply the Immigration and Nationality Act, INA, as written by Congress. The Biden administration closed out tens of thousands of immigration cases that had already been prepared and were slated for expedited removal processing or hearings before the U.S. Immigration Court. This misguided action constituted an egregious example of lawlessness that allowed thousands of illegal aliens and other immigration violators to go free in the United States. Direct ICE to stop ignoring criminal aliens identified through the 287G program. Ultimately, Congress should prevent ICE from ignoring criminal aliens identified by local law enforcement agencies that are partners in the 287G program. However, before congressional action, ICE should be directed to take custody of all aliens with records for felonies, crimes of violence, DUIs, previous removals, and any other crime that is considered a national security or public safety threat as defined under current laws. Eliminate T and U visas. Victimization should not be a basis for an immigration benefit. If an alien who was a trafficking or crime victim is actively and significantly cooperating with law enforcement as a witness, the S visa is already available and should be used. Pending elimination of the T and U visas, the Secretary should significantly restrict eligibility for each visa to prevent fraud. Issue clear guidance regarding detention and bond for aliens. I really despise the way they're using the word aliens here. They're humans. Thousands of illegal aliens are allowed to bond out of immigration detention only to disappear into the interior of the United States, where many commit crimes and many others disappear, never to be heard from again. Of course, there's no source for that, they just made the claim. This occurs primarily because of poorly worded bond regulations, contradictory bond policy memoranda, and poor practices for managing released aliens and the Alternatives to Detention program, ATD, which requires significant reform. Prioritize national security in the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, SEVP. ICE should end its current cozy deference to educational institutions and remove security risks from the program. This requires working with the Department of State to eliminate or significantly reduce the number of visas issued to foreign students from enemy nations. Most of the foregoing can be accomplished rapidly and effectively through executive action that is both lawful and appropriate. Additionally, ICE should clarify who is responsible for enforcing its criminal and civil authorities. It should also remove self-imposed limitations on its nationwide jurisdiction. Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, special agents in the 1811 series should enforce Title 8 and 18 crimes as the biggest part of their portfolio. Alien smuggling, trafficking, and cross-border crime as defined under Title 8 and Title 18 should be the focus of ICE operations. The role of ICE deportation officers should be clarified. ICE enforcement and removal operations, ERO, should be identified as being primarily responsible for enforcing civil immigration regulations, including the civil arrest, detention, and removal of immigration violators anywhere in the United States, without warrant where appropriate, subject only to the civil warrant requirements of the INA where appropriate. All ICE memoranda identifying sensitive zones where ICE personnel are prohibited from operating should be rescinded. Rely on the good judgment of officers in the field to avoid inappropriate situations. Well, we've all seen how that's worked out. To maximize the efficient use of its resources, ICE should make full use of existing expedited removal authorities, ER. The agency has limited the use of ER to eligible aliens apprehended within 100 miles of the border. This is not a statutory requirement. New policies. U.S. national security and public safety interests would be well served if ICE were to be combined with CBP and U.S. CIS, as mentioned above. Additionally, ICE, HSI, along with CBP, should be full participants in the intelligence community. The use of Blackie's warrants should be operationalized within ICE. These civil search warrants are commonly used for worksite enforcement when agents have probable cause that illegal aliens are employed at a business. This would streamline investigations. Safeguarding Americans will require not just securing the border, but continuous vetting and investigations of many aliens who exploited President Biden's open border for potentially nefarious purposes, including some Afghan evacuees sent directly to the U.S. during America's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Budget. Congress should mandate and fund additional bed space for alien detainees. ICE should be funded for a significant increase in detention space, raising the daily available number of beds to 100,000. Congress should fund ICE for at least 20,000 ERO officers and 5,000 Office of the Principal Legal Advisor attorneys, OPLA. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is an agency tasked with administering the legal immigration and certain temporary visa programs. Needed reforms. Since January 2021, USCIS's priorities have been misaligned, and this has transformed it into an open borders agency, ignoring the critical role that it plays in national security, public safety, and safeguarding the integrity of our immigration system. USCIS should be returned to operating as a screening and vetting agency. Regulatory efforts have focused on easing asylum eligibility in a manner that is guaranteed to exacerbate asylum fraud as people surge at the border. Emphasis also has been placed on removing legal barriers to immigration, such as the use of public benefits. These actions violate statutes, erode congressional intent, and provide a significant magnet for continued illegal immigration. Additionally, USCIS resources have been misappropriated to focus more on creating and expanding large-scale parole and temporary status programs that violate the law and are otherwise contrary to congressional intent, instead of focusing on a more secure and efficient process for those who are seeking benefits. The ever-increasing number of applications filed has made it difficult to vet applications adequately for eligibility, fraud, and special national security and public safety problems. The Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate, FDNS, is currently a small directorate with assigned officers reporting through the chain of command in the field, and this has led to stovepiping, lack of coordination in national policy, and inconsistencies throughout the agency. To prioritize vetting and fraud detection, FDNS should undergo a structural shift focused on direct reporting from the field to headquarters, reclassification of leadership, and FDNS directives taking precedence over those of other component entities. Correcting the current misalignment of agency priorities and resources should begin with this primary shift in focus to vetting and fraud detection. These actions would reform the agency, returning it to its screening and vetting mission in protecting the homeland. Other structural changes should include re-implementation of the USCIS Denaturalization Unit, an effort to maintain integrity in the system by identifying and prosecuting criminal and civil denaturalization cases, in combination with the Department of Justice, for aliens who obtained citizenship through fraud or other illicit means. Additionally, USCIS should create a criminal enforcement component within the agency to investigate immigration benefits fraud under Title VIII, perhaps requiring additional legislative and regulatory authorities for the officers themselves, and to prosecute cases through Special Assistant U.S. Attorneys, SAUSAs, with substantive knowledge in the field. Particular attention should be given to addressing increasing incidents of forced labor trafficking in temporary work visa programs. While the Biden regulatory agenda has focused on at least two major rules, the credible fear rule and the public charge rule, USCIS has utilized other policy and internal procedural mechanisms to extend employment authorization to large groups of people who are in the country without legal status. The agency has taken quiet steps to cut corners and lessen adjudicatory standards. During a transition period, a complete audit of agency policies, memoranda, and management directives issued during the Biden administration should be completed, and rescission documents should be prepared for issuance within the first few days of the incoming administration. Additionally, regulatory documents should be drafted to review or reverse all regulations promulgated during the Biden administration. New policies. To advance the national interest, the three core immigration agencies, USCIS, ICE, and CBP, should remerge and have immigration elements outside of DHS, such as ORR, of HHS included. The fragmented immigration enforcement framework that developed in the wake of the Homeland Security Act has weakened each agency and should be remediated. Combining these critical agencies would strengthen their capabilities, ensure cooperation, and promote information sharing. Agency responsibilities and the delineation of authorities, such as inconsistent use of deferred action and issuance of NTAs by each agency, have long been a point of contention that would be addressed much more easily if they were recombined into a single entity. Alternatively, new policies for USCIS, as it currently exists, should focus on matters that can be addressed through administrative action. The workforce should be realigned and, as necessary, retrained on base eligibility and fraud detection rather than speed in processing. Training should be returned to federal law enforcement training centers, FLETCs, which would underscore the enforcement role of USCIS as a vetting agency and be rebranded accordingly. Management directives and policies should realign to ensure that the workforce, while adaptable and able to handle the bulk of USCIS mission, is not allowed to be pulled off mission work to focus on unlawful programs, DACA, mass parole for Afghans, Ukrainians, Venezuelans, etc., which divert resources away from nuclear family and employment programs. They're saving the family. The regulatory agenda should include the immediate submission of notices of proposed rulemaking for the Trump administration's public charge rule, including aspects from its original notice of proposed rulemaking, temporary work visa reform, employment authorization reform rules, asylum bars rule, and a third country transit rule. At a minimum, an enhanced regulatory agenda should include rules strengthening the integrity of the asylum system, parole reform, and U-visa reform that prioritizes relief for victims of heinous crimes and ensures that we protect the truest and most deserving victims of crime. Not all policy changes require formal rulemaking, however, as internal guidance documents are generally exempt under the Administrative Procedure Act, APA. In this sub-regulatory space, USCIS policy memos and operational guidance should reduce the validity of employment authorization documents and end the COVID flexibilities, including the reliance on biometrics reuse. USCIS should also enforce existing regulations by rejecting incomplete applications and petitions, ensuring both that they are completed before accepted for filing and that FDNS signs off on all approved applications and petitions before approval notices are sent to the alien or petitioner. Other efforts should be focused on adjudication standards, returning to nearly 100% interview requirements for all appropriate cases. The incoming administration should spearhead an immigration legislative agenda focused on creating a merit-based immigration system that rewards high-skilled aliens instead of the current system that favors extended family-based and luck-of-the-draw immigration. Well, then let's discuss Melania Trump's parents. To that end, the diversity visa lottery should be repealed. Chain migration should be ended while focusing on the nuclear family and the existing employment visa program should be replaced with a system to award visas only to the best and brightest. Internal effort to limit employment authorization should be matched by congressional action to narrow statutory eligibility to work in the United States and mitigate unfair employment competition for U.S. citizens. The oft-abused H-1B program should be transformed into an elite program through which employers are vying to bring in only the top foreign workers at the highest wages so as not to depress American opportunities. Additionally, Congress should improve the integrity of the temporary work visa programs, repeal temporary protected status (TPS) designations, permanently authorize and make mandatory E-Verify, and end parole abuse by legislating specific parole standards. USCIS should make it clear that where no court jurisdiction exists, it will not honor court decisions that seek to undermine regulatory and sub-regulatory efforts. Finally, USCIS still requires access to all relevant national security and law enforcement databases, in the same vein as any other agency in the intelligence space. This is a key concept that should be addressed as USCIS is returned to functioning primarily as a vetting agency. Budget. USCIS is primarily fee-funded, operating on revenue derived by those who are seeking immigration benefits, work permits, and naturalization. The total agency budget required for fiscal year 2023, including both fees and small appropriation, is slightly less than $6 billion. The bulk of funds are derived from application fees through the Immigration Examinations Fee Account. As a general principle, adjudication of applications and petitions should be paid by applicants, not American taxpayers. It is critical that any changes in the budget, even in the wake of a realigned agency combined with ICE and CBP, should retain a fee-funded model. Given the Obama and Biden administration's lack of will, fees should be increased agency-wide to keep in step with inflation and the true cost of the adjudications. The incoming administration should immediately submit a fee rule that reflects such an increase. Aside from an increase in all fees, the rule should drastically limit the availability for fee waivers and should implement a fee for asylum applications. Additionally, Congress should allow for a 10% across-the-board increase in all fees for all fee rules to account for the fact that new fee rules always lag behind budget requirements. USCIS should strive to increase opportunities for premium processing, a benefit by which applicants can expedite their processing times. While this places time burdens on adjudicators, it provides an opportunity for a significant influx of money into the agency, which is not currently available. While simply raising fees to the necessary levels to make the agency run efficiently would be preferable without the need for expanded premium processing, this short-term measure should be utilized, particularly if longer-term fee rules are unsuccessful. At least until USCIS is caught up on all case backlogs, all applicants rejected for any benefit or status adjudication should be required to leave the U.S. immediately. Ordinary process can resume once all case backlogs have been adjudicated. Finally, USCIS should pause the intake of applications in a benefit category when backlogs in that category become excessive. Once USCIS adjudicators can decrease that caseload to a manageable number, application intake should resume. Personnel. USCIS should be classified as a national security-sensitive agency, and all of its employees should be classified as holding national security-sensitive positions. Leaks must be investigated and punished as they would be in a national security agency, and the union should be decertified. Oh, they hate unions. Any employees who cannot accept that change and cannot conform their behavior to the standards required by such an agency should be separated. USCIS's DC personnel presence should be skeletal, and agency employees with operational or security roles should be rotated out to office throughout the United States. These USCIS employees should live and work in the communities that are most affected by their daily duties and decisions. Necessary border and immigration statutory, regulatory, and administrative changes. The current border security crisis was made possible by glaring loopholes in our immigration system. The result was a preventable and predictable historic increase in illegal and inadmissible encounters along our southern border. This pulled limited resources from the front lines of our nation's borders and away from their national security mission, releasing a vast and complex set of threats into our country. To regain our sovereignty, integrity, and security, Congress must pass meaningful legislation to close the current loopholes and prevent future administrations from exploiting them for political gain or personal ideology. Legislative proposals. Title 42 Authority in Title 8. Create an authority akin to the Title 42 Public Health Authority that has been used during the COVID-19 pandemic to expel illegal aliens across the border immediately when certain non-health conditions are met, such as loss of operational control of the border. Mandatory appropriation for border wall system infrastructure. The monies appropriated would be used to fund the construction of additional border wall systems, technology, and personnel in strategic locations in accordance with the Border Security Improvement Plan, BSIP. Appropriation for port of entry infrastructure. Border security is not addressed solely by systems in between the ports of entry. POEs require technology and physical upgrades, as well as an influx of personnel to meet capacity demands and act as the literal gatekeepers for the country. This is the first line of defense against drug and human smuggling operations. Unaccompanied minors. 1. Congress should repeal Section 235 of the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, which provides numerous immigration benefits to unaccompanied alien children and only encourages more parents to send their children across the border illegally and unaccompanied. These children too often become trafficking victims, which means that the TVPRA has failed. 2. If an alternative to repealing Section 235 of the TVPRA is necessary, the section should be amended so that all unaccompanied children, regardless of nationality, may be returned to their home countries in a safe and efficient manner. Currently, the TVPRA allows only children from contiguous countries, Canada and Mexico, to be returned, while every other unaccompanied minor must be placed into a lengthy process that usually results in the minors landing in the custody of an illegal alien family member. 3. Congress must end the Flores Settlement Agreement by explicitly setting nationwide terms and standards for family and unaccompanied detention and housing. Such standards should focus on meeting human needs and should allow for large-scale use of temporary facilities, for example, tents. 4. Congress should amend the Homeland Security Act and portions of the TVPRA to move detention of alien children expressly from the Department of Health and Human Services to DHS. Asylum reform. 1. The standard for a credible fear of persecution should be raised and aligned to the standard for asylum. It should also account specifically for credibility determinations that are a key element of the asylum claim. 2. Codify former asylum bars and third country transit rules. 3. Congress should eliminate the particular social group protected ground as vague and overbroad, or, in the alternative, provide a clear definition with parameters that at a minimum codify the holding in matter of AB that gang violence and domestic violence are not grounds for asylum. So much for the whole point of asylum and goodwill building. Parole reform. Congress should end the widespread abuse of parole in contravention of statute and return it to its origins as an extraordinary remedy for very limited purposes. NGOs and processing. Congress should halt funds given to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to process and transport illegal aliens into and throughout the United States. Such funds and infrastructure, including the DHS Joint Processing Centers, should be redirected to secure the border, detain aliens, and provide space for immigration court proceedings. Other pathways for border crossers. While Congress should use its oversight authority to ensure that expedited removal is used to the fullest extent and follow to the letter of the law, other paths for border crossers should be included in a legislative package. 1. Migrant protection protocols. Update the statutory language providing the basis for the Remain in Mexico program as needed to withstand judicial scrutiny and executive inaction. 2. Asylum cooperative agreements. While the agreements themselves must be negotiated, Congress should mandate that the executive branch work faithfully to negotiate and execute ACAs and set parameters to ensure that an unwilling executive cannot renege on an existing agreement or abandon the effort. 3. Other expedited pathways. Congress should explicitly permit programs akin to the Prompt Asylum Claim Review, PACR, and Humanitarian Asylum Review Process, HARP programs. Employment authorization. 1. Congress should reassert control of employment authorization, which is subject to rampant regulatory abuse, and limit it to certain categories of legal immigrants and non-immigrants. 2. Congress should also permanently authorize E-Verify and make it mandatory. State and local law enforcement. 1. Congress should unequivocally authorize state and local law enforcement to participate in immigration and border security actions in compliance with Arizona versus United States. 2. Congress should require compliance with immigration detainers to the maximum extent consistent with the 10th Amendment and set financial disincentives for jurisdictions that implement either official or unofficial sanctuary policies. Prosecutorial discretion. Congress should restrict the authority for prosecutorial discretion to eliminate it as a catch-all excuse for limiting immigration enforcement. Mandatory detention. Congress should eliminate ambiguous discretionary language in Title VIII that aliens may be detained and clarify that aliens shall be detained. This language, which contrasts with other shall detain language in statute, creates unhelpful ambiguity and allows the executive branch to ignore the will of Congress. Regulations. Withdraw Biden administration regulations and reissue new regulations in the following areas. 1. Credible fear/asylum jurisdiction for border crossers. 2. Public charge. T visa and U visa reform. Unless and until T and U visas are repealed, each program needs to be reformed to ensure that only legitimate victims of trafficking and crimes who are actively providing significant material assistance to law enforcement are eligible for spots in the queue. Repeal TPS designations. H-1B reform. Transform the program into an elite mechanism exclusively to bring in the best and brightest at the highest wages while simultaneously ensuring that U.S. workers are not being disadvantaged by the program. H-1B is a means only to supplement the U.S. economy and to keep companies competitive, not to depress U.S. labor markets artificially in certain industries. Or you could just fund better educational standards in the U.S., you dips. Employment authorization. Along with the legislative proposal, take regulatory action to limit the classes of aliens eligible for work authorization. Executive orders. Pathways for border crossers. 1. Direct the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security to reinstate asylum cooperative agreements with Northern Triangle countries immediately. 2. Recommence negotiations with Mexico to fully implement the Remain in Mexico protocols. 3. Reinstate, to the extent possible, expedited pathways with full credible fear/immigration court processes, PACR and HARP. 4. Prohibit the use of notices to report, the use of any funds for travel into the interior of the United States, and government flights or transportation for aliens. 5. Mandate that ICE use all detention space in full compliance with Section 235 of the INA, issue weekly reports on detention capacity, and provide authority for low-level temporary capacity, for example, tents, once permanent space is full. 6. Eliminate the use of ADT for border crossers, except in rare cases and only with the explicit authority of the Secretary. 7. Prohibit the use of parole except in matters that are certified by the Secretary of Homeland Security as requiring action for humanitarian or significant public benefit reasons, and prohibit the use of parole in any categorical circumstance. Enforcement. 1. Restrict prosecutorial discretion to eliminate it as a catch-all excuse for limiting immigration enforcement. 2. Mandate the use of E-Verify for anyone doing business with the government. 3. Designate USCIS as intelligence community adjacent, ensuring that it has access to national security and law enforcement databases. 4. Rescind all memoranda limiting enforcement of immigration laws, including those identifying sensitive zones. 5. End ICE's widespread use of termination and administrative closure of cases in immigration court. Averting or curtailing a mass migration event. 1. Provide that whenever the Secretary of Homeland Security determines that an actual or anticipated mass migration of aliens en route to or arriving off the coast of the U.S. presents urgent circumstances requiring an immediate federal response, the Secretary may make subject to the approval of the President rules and regulations prohibiting in whole or in part the introduction of persons from such countries or places as he or she shall designate in order to avert or curtail such mass migration and for such period of time as is deemed necessary, including through the expulsion of such aliens. Such rule and regulation making shall not be subject to the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act. So 2 people get to decide whether or not the country's open. 2. Provide that notwithstanding any other provision of law, when the Secretary makes such a determination and then promulgates, subject to the approval of the President, such rules and regulations, the Secretary shall have the authority to waive all legal requirements of Title VIII that the Secretary, in his or her sole discretion, determines are necessary to avert or curtail the mass migration. If you do this, whoever the Secretary is could see a fake Fox News report on, quote, caravans of immigrants and just decide to shut down all immigration. Sub-regulatory matters. USCIS priorities and structural changes. 1. Ensure that focus is returned to vetting, base eligibility of applicants, and fraud detection. 2. Realign the Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate, FDNS, to ensure agency-wide consistency on implementation of fraud detection and vetting policies. 3. Reveal and repeal any internal agency memo that is inconsistent with the priorities described in this chapter. 287G Program. Issue a memo prohibiting any jurisdiction that applies from being denied access to the program unless good cause is shown. Homeland Security Investigations. HSI Priorities. Issue Department Management Directive and ICE Companion Directive to refocus HSI on immigration offenses and criminal offenses typically associated with immigration, for example, human trafficking. All criminal investigative work without a clear nexus to the border or otherwise to Title VIII should be turned over to the appropriate federal agencies. Blackie's warrants. ICE, OPLA, ERO, and HSI should issue a joint internal memo on operationalizing Blackie's warrants for immediate use on worksite enforcement and other appropriate investigations and operations. And I'm gonna stop there. The next section looks pretty lengthy. It's titled Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. This recording and all other recordings related to this Project 2025 reading are copyrighted by Douglas Wayne Ricketts. All rights reserved. Unless you agree with me that Project 2025 sucks, then please feel free to use as much of this reading as you want. Thanks for listening.